I like Homelander, Rorschach, and Walter White, and I'm tired of pretending like I don't. Discourse around how we view characters, or media in general, can get really dumb really fast. With characters like the ones I brought up before, there tends to be a sentiment of if you like these characters, you miss the point of what you're looking at. And I just want to talk about how flawed that line of thinking really is. It's surprisingly common online with tons of memes being made, and even big YouTubers like Quentin Reviews managing to sound even more patronizing than usual when talking about this particular subject.
So, here's the thing. I fucking hate Rorschach.
Since we're already talking about him, Rorschach is a character who is constantly misconstrued to the point where people think that just because Alan Moore intended for him to be hated, you have no reason to enjoy him. Rorschach was written as a critique of smelly nerds, so if you enjoy him, you must be a smelly nerd. The problem arises when you look at the actions of Rorschach in the story and honestly weigh their morality. I'll use a part of my script for the Watchmen video that will be coming out later this month to further explain my point. Rorschach is a pretty polarizing person, and Alan Moore himself intended Rorschach to be satirical, and was surprised when he found so many people enjoyed him, which I found odd. Rorschach might stink and he might not talk super eloquently, and even though I disagree with him on certain things like the moral lapse comment, or reporting the company Moloch was getting his meds from, he has his values and he sticks to them. He's the only one of the Watchmen who decides that maybe killing millions isn't okay, and that Veidt deserves to answer for his crimes. His views might be too black and white, but at least he's trying to right the world in his own way. I feel like people get way too caught up in Rorschach's lack of tact and social skills, to the point where all of Rorschach's actions get ignored and he just gets called a sexist and that's the end of it. As a matter of fact, it's pretty telling that Alan Moore himself seems to think that if you say some mean things, everything else you do is null and void. This entire situation is a perfect example of Death of the Author. Death of the Author, if you don't know, is an essay written in 1967 talking about the practice of relying on the intentions of an author to explain the ultimate meaning of a text and how that just does not work. According to the essay, it's the reader's responsibility to separate a literary work from its creator in order to free the text from what he referred to as interpretive tyranny. To make a medium-sized story short, writer intentions shouldn't play any part in your opinion. You have to reach your own conclusions when it comes to a character. Speaking of my own conclusions, let's talk about Walter White. Walt is someone who started out morally ambiguous, claiming that he's just trying to provide for his family by selling drugs and profiting off of the addiction in his town. Walt slowly becomes more and more self-obsessed, doing all types of horrible things to maintain what he has, like poisoning a child or letting a woman choke to death in her own vomit. By the time we get to the end of the series, we find that Walt did all of this for himself because he didn't like how his life turned out. Basically, Walt has the ultimate midlife crisis and leaves a trail of bodies in his wake. Vince Gilligan, who is the creator of the show, was able to make a lot of people basically forget everything Walt does and focus all their hate on Walt's wife, Skyler. Skyler is seemingly nagging Walt all the time, and even though she is right about Walt's drug dealing and how it makes everything so much more dangerous, that valid criticism gets buried with an annoying tone that makes people tune out.
Please just hear me out, please!
I feel like this hate for Skyler was the real starting point for the if you like them you miss the point argument. Skyler is by no means perfect,
I thought Ted.
but she tends to be the most reasonable person in the room as long as Saul isn't around. Anna Gunn did a great job towing the line between irrational, nagging wife and the voice of reason being dragged into an underworld that she can't begin to understand. The difference between these two characters that I've talked about is pretty big. Vince Gilligan made it clear that Walt was not a good person, constantly showing that just when you think Walt has reached an impossible depth, he goes even lower. When we get to the series finale, Walt is so wrapped up in his evil that he's been drowned by his own deeds, leading to his death. At the end of Watchmen, Rorschach is the only one left standing in his morals, and I think Alan Moore was shooting for an end justifies the means type of theme, trying to show Rorschach as an out-of-touch loser who won't budge when it seemingly would be best to do so, but that isn't something that's communicated very well. For the Rorschach critique to have the best impact, I think Roar should have given him the temperament that he gave Dave at the beginning of the comic. If he did that, Rorschach loses a lot of what makes him so cool, and it would make him seem like something that even the staunchest Rorschach hater wouldn't accuse him of, being a coward. Making Rorschach the most active person in the setting as he tries to save his friends doesn't quite make him the loser Alan Moore intended him to be. If Rorschach was the one who quit and was hiding in his apartment instead of fighting crime, the amount of people who would enjoy his character would drastically drop. As for Homelander, I just like him because he's cool. I don't care about him being horrible when almost everyone else in the story, at least in the comic, is just as bad. If you've watched this channel for a while now, you'll know that I made a whole video about how much I enjoyed Homelander as a character, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Just know I like the power set and the costume a lot. There is a character archetype that ends up being put in the you shouldn't like these guys category. Those of course being the quote unquote Sigma characters. Senator Armstrong, Patrick Bateman, and Joaquin Phoenix's Joker are all characters who aren't allowed to be simply enjoyed. I feel like people think that if you enjoy a character to a certain degree, you have to agree with their ideology. Someone like Senator Armstrong is loved because of his personality and his look. And while there are obviously people who agree with his ideology, there are tons of other reasons to enjoy him. Patrick Bateman is loved because of the image he portrays for himself and how different the real version of himself is. The memes that revitalized the American Psycho fandom have grown to the point where people have started to take them as serious opinions, making it seem like there's tons of people who idolize Bateman's image. The fact that he was used in a political ad makes things even worse, because you know that was a creative decision made either by a 20-year-old who never leaves the house, or a 48-year-old who came across the Sigma edit and wanted to seem cool and hip with the youth. And that's not a reflection of the fanbase as a whole. A common thread I came across while researching for this video was people who hated Rorschach because of his fans, and I don't like how often people say things like that. A work of art should be viewed as its own thing, divorced from its fanbase entirely. Patrick Bateman is pathetic, and a few edits on TikTok don't change that fact. Joaquin's Joker is loved because of his vulnerability and his bucking of the system that held him down. He finds himself in a relatable situation, broke, down on his luck, and unable to get the help he needs. By the time the end of the movie comes around, not that much has changed in terms of his circumstances, but he's risen above those circumstances. People get tired of the day-to-day slog of working a job they hate, so they naturally get drawn in by someone who got past that. Joker's methods are wrong, but his end result was something a lot of people strive for. I want to be clear. Idolizing characters who are horrible people and trying to be like them is a really bad idea. Liking how these characters are written is fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just because the creator didn't like the character doesn't mean you can't.